On the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome to the program the chairman of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, Ben Wickler. Ben, welcome to the program.
Sam, it's great to be with you. Appreciate it.
Is it the first time you've ever been on this program? No.
You can't be.
I don't know. I
can't
imagine.
I think I was on when I was a Move On.
Oh, yeah, or maybe a vase. Ben and I first met each other back in the Air America days.
2004.
When you were a producer of the biggest show on the network. And I remember walking into, you were producing Al Franken's show. I walked into the Franken's office. I looked up at the board, and you guys had created this massive full wall length grid of like every show for the next like month. And I walked out of that room and I walked down the hall and I almost started weeping based when I was like, where am I going to get my Ben Wickler? And you actually sent me somebody. That's how Josh Horton ended up working on the show. But that level of expertise and organization is now going towards making sure that we win Wisconsin. I want to talk about that a little bit, but let's talk about the convention. It is sort of taking place in Milwaukee like it was supposed to. Just give me a sense of like what was going on in terms of like the preparation for Milwaukee, why Milwaukee was so crucial to have it there, and to what extent is there sort of like, is Wisconsin getting, I don't know, the convention bounce?
So there's one reason why the convention was going to be in Milwaukee. And that reason is that according to just about every model, if you do 3 states, 2 states, or 1 state, Wisconsin is the state most likely to tip the Electoral College one way or the other if the race is close. The Trump campaign last year had a briefing where they said it was secret, recorded, and leaked. If we win Wisconsin, we win the election. If we lose Wisconsin, we lose the election. And a convention is a tactic to win the election. That is the fundamental premise. So the DNC had this selection process. They looked at, Florida and Texas and Wisconsin, and it didn't hurt that Tom Perez's wife was from Wisconsin. His daughter was a UW-Madison student, and he got married here in our state. But fundamentally, he was looking at the math, and this is where it had to be. So Milwaukee got the pick. And then the other side of the convention unfolded, which is when you have a convention, especially in a city that's relatively small, like Milwaukee, relative to other major metropolises, it was going to be a giant boon to the city. The biggest spotlight that had ever been cast on Milwaukee. 50,000 visitors, hundreds of millions of dollars of economic stimulus. If you talk to like performing magicians and musicians and people who make murals and all this kind of stuff, it was going to be this incredible moment to actually shine, to have national eyes and ears on their stuff. Every venue was booked, every hotel room was booked, every hotel room for miles around, all the way to like Madison and suburbs of Chicago were booked up for the convention. And then the pandemic hit, and some form of it was going to hit no matter what. But Trump completely failed the response. And so while other countries like had their COVID moment, had their shutdown, got their act together, got it under control, have reopened, have stuff happening, you see the photos from Wuhan, from South Korea, from all over the place. There's stadiums full of people doing stuff. Here, what started as a few week shutdown went into a total shutdown, and now the convention is completely virtual. And it has been very tough for Wisconsin to not have the kind of like civic, economic stimulus and energy and excitement. But this amazing thing happened over the last couple of days, which is that people had sort of had their hearts broken, and now we're actually experiencing a convention that has stuff happening that wouldn't even have been possible if it had been in person. That roll call could not have happened. And that right now, like when I talk to the Wisconsin delegates to the convention, who are going to have the experience of their lives, going to all these parties, all this kind of stuff, they're pumped. They're super excited about what they're seeing. And that feels really good.
It's funny that you mentioned that, the roll call, because I I just talked about how annoyed I was about Colin Powell being, sort of platformed there. Like, I'm okay with an ad because you got to win the election, but I just think that I hate the idea of the institution of the Democratic Party whitewashing anybody who was that involved in selling us the Iraq War, frankly. But the roll call thing, I gotta say, I mean, I was watching this. It is, first of all, it's better than it is when you do it in the convention hall, because you actually get to see the people in the context in which they live, and you get to see them and hear them in a way you don't get it, in the roll call. And I was just genuinely impressed with how diverse this country is and how diverse the Democratic Party is. And I'm sure, part of that is constructed to make it look diverse. But when I contemplate like what the Republican Party, if they were to do that, I mean, that would be the comparison would be shocking.
Yes.
I mean, it would be shocking. You just have one white guy after another, more or less the same age in 50 states. And what we saw on that thing, do we have a clip of that, Brendan? We want to play a little bit of a clip of it. It was just really impressive. This is just
Alaska
the beginning. It starts with A. Go ahead.
7 votes for Bernie Sanders and 12 votes for the next president, Joe Biden.
California, home to our next vice president, Kamala Harris, cast 231 votes for Bernie Sanders and 263 votes for our next president, Joe Biden.
Indiana casts 2 votes for my friend Bernie Sanders and 86 votes for the next president, Joe Biden.
I mean,
candidates of our state proudly cast 10 votes for Bernie Sanders and 35 votes for our next president, Joe Biden.
Montana cast 1 vote for Bernie Sanders and 18 votes for our next president, Joe Biden.
New Mexico proudly casts 4 votes for Bernie Sanders and 42 votes for the next president of the United States of America, Joe Biden.
Okay,
North Carolina cast.
this is the shortened version, and you have people on there who, I don't know how many indigenous folks were on there. I mean, it was just like a cross section of Americans. I think there was a couple people delivered in Spanish. I found the whole thing really impressive.
People spoke their tribal languages. I watched that and I was like, this has always been a multilingual country and it will always be a multilingual country. And there's so like the diversity was so inspiring because of this, shared sense of like, we're going to do this together. We're in this together. And that is actually the only way that Democrats win, is to be able to actually pull people together across race and geography and ethnicity and, tribal affiliation, all these other dimensions. That is what this party is. And it was seeing ourselves reflected back from the screen was amazing.
All right. So with that said, let's also address the other question. First off, do you have a sense, because one thing that we saw it in the context of that roll call, we had some union people in there. You had like that shot of Pete Buttigieg, who was sort of like in this like modern techie looking office building. There was a couple other guys from like Delaware who looked like they were, just heading off to have a drink at the country club. But there was also a lot of working people who were in there. And so, one of the problems I think that we had in Wisconsin, although I wanted you to talk about it, was one like was with working people and with primarily Black folk too in Milwaukee in terms of turnout. Like, give me a sense of what went wrong in Wisconsin last year.
So I think you're asking about what went wrong in Wisconsin in 2016.
2016, sorry, last time.
Yep. So 2016, first of all, both candidates wildly underperformed. People did not like either of them. They both got fewer votes than Obama, who won in 2008 and 2012, also fewer than Romney, who lost in 2012, and fewer than George W. Bush and John Kerry in 2004.
Wow. Hundreds
of thousands of people didn't vote. And both the Green and Libertarian candidates got more than a winning margin in Wisconsin, which was 22,748 votes. So there was a lot of none of the above voter response that year. Second thing is the polling was wildly off. And so both candidates for most of the race, and then the Clinton campaign specifically until the very end, thought that Wisconsin wasn't a battleground state. The first ad that the Clinton campaign ran was started the week of October 28th. The Trump campaign sort of sensed this opportunity and started quietly doing stuff in Wisconsin for a bit longer than that. But it just wasn't like nobody's model had Wisconsin as the tipping point.
We should be clear.
Part of the blue wall.
We should be clear that when you say the polling was way off, the Wisconsin state polling.
Yes, exactly. The polls of Wisconsin found that if you average the Real Clear Politics polling average on election day had Clinton up 6.5 points in Wisconsin. And
Feingold too, right? And Feingold.
Yeah, Feingold was ahead the entire time. I saw him a bunch of times that year, and he never was behind in the polls. And it was all wrong. And it was like, so if you look at how it was wrong, turnout was down in Milwaukee by 40,000 votes relative to 2012. That was about an eighth of the swing from Obama to Trump, 2012 to 2016. Half the swing was in communities where less than 1,000 people cast ballots. So it was this massive margins that were racked up in small towns in rural Wisconsin all over the state. Suburbs actually moved towards Clinton in 2016, and Dane County smashed every turnout record and, made it a lot closer than it would have been otherwise. So, the biggest thing was small town and rural areas and Milwaukee. And I think one of the structural factors was a couple of structural factors I'll point to. One is the smashing of organized labor, systematic dismantling of the labor movement in Wisconsin by the Walker team, which there's one political science study that really carefully looks and finds that when you go from being a unionized state to a right to work state, it shifts the presidential vote share by 3.5 percentage points. Because unions, being part of a union, hearing from your union about who's going to look out for your interests from someone you trust, that changes how you vote. And unions are engines of get out the vote operations, not only for union households, but for everybody, including in communities of color. In Wisconsin, AFSCME was created, public employee unionism was created in Wisconsin. And that's who Scott Walker went on after first with Act 10 and the massive Wisconsin uprising in 2011.
Yep.
So the smashing of labor, and the other side is just straight up voter suppression, which included some of the harshest voter ID laws in the country, gerrymandering, which makes state legislative races less competitive, which drives down turnout, the changes in the way people registered to vote, which made it hard to do in-person voter registration drives, like all these different changes that really were targeted to suppressing especially Black votes and Latino votes to a lesser extent. And then young people. They made student IDs only work for 2 years. So if you're in a 4-year college, you need to go get a new ID in order to be able to vote. We just beat that in court, but that was in place in 2016. So there's so many things that they did surgically to make it hard for us to win. And that partly that threw off the polling, because polling doesn't account for whether people are going to get their vote suppressed. There are other problems with polling too. So this year,
and we should say, let me just interject one thing here. When you have a state where everybody assumes is not in play, the resources that go into polling are less. There's not as many polls because there's just not as much of a market because people have to spend money on the polls and somebody's got to pay for it. And they just don't spend as much energy or attention on a state that they don't think is in play.
There's polls. There's a lot of kinds of research. There's focus groups. There's having tracking panels of people over time. There's all these things you can do to figure out what's going on, and also to do it at a regional level within specific regions of the state, within specific communities and demographics. Exactly as you say, you just don't do that. You don't pay attention when you think that something's not going to be a problem or an opportunity. And this time it is so night and day different. Wisconsin is every aspect of everything here is scrutinized because people know. I mean, the one thing I will also say, Wisconsin had 3 out of the past 5 presidential elections had under 1 percentage point margins. So it was the closest state in the country in 2004. John Kerry and George W. Bush were here over and over and over, like 17 times from the conventions to election day. And it was the second closest state in the country in 2000. It was actually, in terms of numerically, it was closer in 2000 than it was in 2004. So Obama blew it out of the water to such a degree. And the fact that Democrats did win both of those contests, it meant that when you look on paper, Wisconsin's, blue from 1984 to 2012 looks fine. But elections have been very hard fought here very often. For whatever reason, that was missed in 2016. It is not missed now. And what we've been doing at our state party is really my predecessor chair started an organizing program modeled on the Obama neighbor-to-neighbor model, where you build local teams led by members of their own community that organize volunteers, and the organizers on the staff of the state party, they basically train and mentor these local leaders to build their own canvassing operations. I was elected in 2019 and just have been working to put that on rocket fuel. So we've had this gigantic year-over-year investment in grassroots organizing, and you could sort of see the results of it in our spring Supreme Court election this year, when we had volunteers in every part of the state that could ultimately turn on a dime with coronavirus and switch to teaching people how to request absentee ballots, which is something that is hard to do here and has not been done in significant numbers here before. But we had this massive wave, 4 times the previous record of absentee ballot requests. We won absentee ballots in a landslide. We defeated a sitting Supreme Court justice for the second time in half a century, and I think maybe helped freak Trump out about mail-in voting, which he's now dismantling America's most popular institution in order to prevent, which we also have to sidestep now and have a plan around that. But that is the recent history of politics here: the right rigging the system and us investing in organizing to get around that.
So what does the polling look like this time around? I mean, the interesting change in the dynamic is, I would imagine, whereas the Trump campaign was trying to be very targeted and surgical and quiet while they were doing this, so that they wouldn't tip the Clinton campaign off as to, like, maybe you're not as safe in Wisconsin as you think. I would imagine now it's more like nobody's trying to play that game. Everybody realizes we're mobilizing everything in these places. Do you have a sense of what the polling looks like? I mean, are there public polls? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, there's a bunch of public polls. They have us an average of 4 or 5 points up right now. There's some outliers in both directions, but if you look at the kind of gold standard polls, it's a 4 or 5 point margin, right at the edge or just over the edge of the margin of error. No candidate's breaking 50% yet, which is really, really where you want to be, because
right, that's scary.
It's
scary that you don't have 50%, right? Like I would rather a 3-point lead than with me over 50% than a 5-point lead with me under 50%. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. And it's like, especially what everyone is freaked out about is, our people, especially because Trump is so nakedly racist and was so horrible after George Floyd's murder, are there a lot of white voters who don't want to admit that they support Trump? And so they're registering as undecided in polls, but they will actually come home to him on election day. And, with this margin, especially being under 50, we're just going to organize like we're 2 points behind all the way through. And if we get to the end and discover that we wanted a blowout, that is delightful. But under no circumstances do I want us to let up on the gas for even a second on the basis of polling saying that we're going to be okay, because we tried that and it was a, unparalleled disaster for every human who will ever live. And so this time it is to the wall, pushing as hard as we can. We're doing these massive virtual phone banks now, calling people who we haven't spoken to before, to find every possible person who's willing to turn out and vote against Trump, and then help those people. To get an absentee ballot here, you have to upload a photo of your voter ID to a form on the internet to get a ballot sent to the address where you've already proven that you live to register to vote by showing your ID, which is a system literally built by the GOP to keep people out. But we are helping people do that in a massive way. And then if needed, people can hand deliver their absentee ballots if the mail service is screwed up. We just have to do everything we can.
All right. So let me just go back to just see if I got what you're saying correctly about what happened in 2016 in terms of the numbers. There was whatever number of voters who went from, you had a tremendous amount of voters stay at home because they didn't like either candidate. And then you had a certain number of voters who went from Obama to to Trump, right? And you're saying that like we had that those voters, the second group, came from small rural towns who came out to vote in for the first time in years, essentially, and that the voters who stayed at home were basically in Milwaukee, more or less.
That is, yeah, more or less right. There was also a third-party vote. I think you left that piece out.
Right. Okay.
And there are difference of opinion about how much there was an actual like surge for Trump in rural areas and how much it was just a swing for Trump. And it's hard to figure out exactly from the data. But what's clear is that Trump, there were rural areas of Wisconsin. There are some areas, especially southwestern Wisconsin, that have been blue over and over that turned red in 2016. And there's other areas that have been reddish that turned deep red. There's just like Trump just ran up the score in rural Wisconsin.
And we don't know if that's a function of new rural voters coming in or just old, existing blue, existing Democrat votes in those rural areas staying at home.
So we have some information about it. Wisconsin's data is notoriously bad because we have same-day voter registration, which is great. But when someone same-day registers, instead of like changing their existing voter registration, they show up as a new person. And so there's always this effort, there's all this work to do to figure out exactly which voter this is. What we do know for sure is that Western Wisconsin, this swing area that had been blue went red for Trump, and then we won it back in 2018, and we won it again this spring in the spring of 2020. And so whether people, just kind of like went on a date with Trump and now are back in the fold or back in play, or whether it's a different group of people, like that's an area where it's very competitive for us. In Northeast Wisconsin, Green Bay, Appleton, the Fox River Valley area, this whole other region, that is also a big swing region that Trump is obsessed with. And we're fighting for votes there too. Those are kind of the big swings. The Northwest used to be, Dave Obey was a congressman, Democratic congressman for decades, but that is like it's so kind of in the Fox News thrall. We're organizing, we're closing the margins there, but it's not going blue at this moment. It's very, very tough.
I mean,
yeah.
Wisconsin, like Ohio to some extent, like Michigan to some extent, is and Illinois are states that seem to me to really capture the different dynamics that exist in the American electorate, broadly speaking. I mean, I don't want to over exaggerate, and I think there's some cohorts that aren't sort of represented there, but this particularly the urban rural dynamic is captured in these states quite a bit, right? I mean, so used to say like as Ohio goes, the country goes. I mean, it's sort of like shifted to let me see how all four of those states are going, or three of them, anyways.
There's a comedian from Wisconsin who moved home and set up a website and Twitter account called As Goes Wisconsin, specifically premised on this idea that as goes Wisconsin, so goes the nation. And if
that doesn't sound very funny, Ben.
What's that? It
doesn't sound very funny.
The actual content is excellent.
Okay.
The name of it does not contain the joke.
All right, good.
Yeah.
That's fine.
If we win Ohio, we don't have to worry about Wisconsin. I would be delighted for us to do that. But Wisconsin, right now, it's sitting. If you add up all the electoral college votes of the states where Trump is less popular than he is here, it's just shy of 270. And if you add up all the electoral college votes of the states where he's more popular than he is here, it's just shy of 270. So you kind of have to add Wisconsin or hopscotch over Wisconsin and get an even harder to get state if you want to win for either candidate. And that's why the convention's here, and it's also why Trump was here on Monday and Pence is here today, and like the GOP is, they see this as the place to make their stand. And
is it
yeah.
How much of a detriment is it that, I mean, look, Joe Biden is not traveling like Trump is for a number of reasons. How much does that make your job harder?
I think COVID makes it harder, but like there's a real medium as the message aspect to how we're campaigning. We are the party. Biden is the presidential candidate that cares about people, that cares about healthcare, that cares about ending this pandemic. And if we don't end this pandemic, as we've now seen, you can't open the economy and open schools for any lengthy period of time because people are going to get coronavirus and start dying again. And so, like, the GOP is literally, they are back out knocking on doors in person. They're having in-person events. Their state convention, they had 300 people in a room watching Congressman Glenn Grothman start coughing while he tried to say Trump's name. Like, the GOP is, they have their head in the sand. They're acting like it's not happening. And for some of their voters, that is the coolest thing ever. And for a lot of voters, that is like horrible. And, you know, the Biden campaign's decision was to just really focus on public health, including this question of whether he was going to travel here in person. And that conveys how seriously we take the pandemic. Now, everyone in Wisconsin knows the Biden campaign is doing a ton to try to win here, because every time you turn on a screen, you're going to see a Biden ad or a Trump ad, and probably both. We have organizers everywhere. You can't, people's phones are ringing with our calls all the time. Like, everyone knows that we're a battleground state that the Biden campaign takes incredibly seriously, but what the Biden campaign is communicating through its actions is that it's just not going to put people's health at risk in order to try to get their vote. And that is actually a good way of getting their vote.
So lastly, Ben, if there are people who want to help out, and you know, your state has been one of the states that I've been sort of like focused on in this regard. But if people want to help out, what can they do? How can they donate money to the state party? Can they do calling? What would be helpful for folks to do if they want to focus on Wisconsin and help you out there?
That is a great 2-item list of things to do. If you go to wisdems.org, wisdems.org/donate, you can chip in. You go to wisdems.org/volunteer. You can sign up to make calls. And frankly, like, hours and dollars are the things that we need. We're building this gigantic effort to reach out to everybody. We're calling, we're also texting, we're doing social media outreach, all these different things. And when we get money, we use it to hire organizers, to recruit volunteers and recruit volunteer leaders. And you can cut out the middleman by volunteering directly, but frankly, we need both. So I'd be so grateful for Majority Report listeners doing that, and I appreciate the question.
Ben, thanks for coming on, talking to us about this. I wish you guys luck. I couldn't feel more confident, at least about what you guys are doing. I hope you guys pull it out, obviously for the sake of the country. But it's nice to feel like there's somebody super competent who is working on this, and I appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, folks, there you have it. Wisdems. What do you say? Wisdems.org? I don't know what the Wisdems, like wisdems. I mean, I get it. Wisconsin Democrats, but why not WisconsinDemocrats.org? I don't know. I'll talk to him about that. Folks,